you need the worms for?
Worms are their money. The bones are their dollars.
Margaret confronts Dr. Brewer about his leaf hair, and he reassures her it's just a side effect of his work in the basement. He reveals to the kids that he's working on something
very, very unusual. I'm trying to build a plant that is part animal.
Part plant and part animal, huh?
I can't say anymore.
Then Dr. Brewer makes some gross plant soup for the kids, and he really wants them to eat it.
Pick up your spoons and eat it.
Unfortunately, his interrogation gets interrupted by a home visit from his former boss, a Mr. Martinez, or should I say, Dr. Merrick?
Dr. Merrick.
And the kids shovel the suspicious plant soup into the trash. Yeah, in the book, Dr. Brewer's boss is Mr. Martinez. In the show, it's Dr. Merrick. I don't know why they changed the name. It's like in Welcome to Dead House when they changed the character's name from Karen Somerset to Karen Thurston. Except in that scenario, she was kind of a different character. But here, Mr. Martinez and Dr. Merrick are exactly the same character, so I don't know. Dr. Merrick disappears into Dr. Brewer's basement to check out his work because, as it turns out, he didn't want to fire Dr. Brewer.
You know, I've always supported your work. It wasn't my idea to let you go. The board forced me.
But the thing is, he never comes out of the basement.
I didn't see him leave.
Are you interrogating me, Margaret?
There's an extra scene here in the show where Casey gets strangled by a rogue plant vine. And I guess they did that so they'd have a cliffhanger, because this is a two-parter episode, just like Welcome to Dead House. Welcome to Dead House had a couple of TV exclusive additions too, like the family wreath. But I think the family wreath was way better than the strangling vine. You know, in any case, I did want to note, though, that not every Goosebumps TV episode was a two-parter, so we got lucky for this video that both episodes were two-parters, so we get a lot of extra details. You know, not every story got so lucky, but we'll talk about that another day. I really don't like Monster Blood, if you haven't picked up on that by now. Fed up with their shenanigans, Dr. Brewer installs a lock on the basement door. In the book, he did this way back in chapter 7, but in the show, he does it towards the end.
I'm going out for a little while. I'll be back in a couple of hours.
It's at this point, the books in the show take a pretty major deviation. In the show, Margaret wants to call her mom, but she can't find the phone number.
I think Dad took it. He didn't want us to call Mom.
So she and Casey go to Dr. Brewer's room to snoop around. They end up getting an answering machine message from Dr. Merrick's wife, who says he never came home.
I was wondering if my husband was there. I'm a little worried. He was supposed to be home hours ago.
Suddenly, what's that? Uh-oh, Dad's back. At this point, it's just like, come on, dude. You can't be territorial about every room in the house. Where do you want them to go?
I want you back in your room. That clear?
Oh, all right, fair enough. Margaret hides from Dr. Brewer under the bed and sees him drop Dr. Merrick's wallet. In the book, Casey's actually the one who finds the wallet. He finds Mr. Martinez's wallet and a pile of his clothes down on the floor in the basement. In both scenarios, though, the kids reach the same conclusion.
I have to know the truth. And I have a feeling the truth is in the basement.
It's time to get to the bottom of this. Literally. Oh, come on, that one wasn't so bad. The kids head down to the basement. In the show, they come with Weed Killer. You'll find out what that's for later. While exploring the basement, they discover a lot of creepy plant-human hybrids. Although the ones in the show aren't as crazy as the ones in the books. There's this hand plant thing, and then one of the plants has a face. This one actually creeped me out as a kid, to be fair. But the book has one I wish they had made in the show. There's this tomato that has a human nose and mouth, and it's described as uttering mournful sighs. That would have been cool to see. Margaret and Casey hear banging from the supply closet.
Who's there?
And they open it to discover their dad.
Dad? It's Dad! That's not Dad! No, stop! Casey, let go of me! What's wrong with you? It's Dad! It can't be Dad! Dad left, remember?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of distrust between the two kids and what appears to be Dr. Brewer's twin. I mean, where's his trademark Dodgers cap? Dr. Brewer quickly tries to explain the situation.
No, that wasn't me. I've been locked up in that closet for days.
Huh? But how? We saw you.
No, it wasn't me. It's a plant. It's a plant copy of me.
You're saying the father we've been living with is a plant?
That's right, it's all coming together now. That's why he was sleeping on a bed of dirt and worms and eating plant food. Say, what normally eats plant food? Oh, that's right, plants. This is what I mean. Stay in the basement. A little funny. It's a little funny once you start thinking about it, because like, why would plant dad need to sleep in dirt? Does he have roots? What is he, again, what are the worms for?
The bones are their money. So are the worms.
Margaret decides to free No Hat Dad, but then Dodgers Cap Dad shows up.
I'm your real father.
The two dads argue back and forth about who's the real one and who's the plant copy. Margaret holds both of them at weed killer point, trying to decide who to spray. That's when No Hat Dad plays his trump card.
Please. Princess. Princess.
So Margaret sprays Mr. Dodger's Cap, who turns out to be the true plant dad. This scene makes a lot more sense in the book, but, you know, like certain things in Welcome to Dead House, they had to remove some of the more mature themes for the TV show. So let me explain. So in the book, the real Dr. Brewer picks up an axe to defend himself, but in the show, it's just a pry bar. In the same vein, the book doesn't have the kids using weed killer at all. Instead, for the plant dad versus human dad confrontation, Margaret's wielding the axe Dr. Brewer originally picked up. And most shockingly, the way she figures out which dad is real is she stabs her real dad to see what color blood comes out. Because remember how there was green blood coming out of plant dad's cut earlier? But also in the very first chapter, how it details that human dad had red blood coming from the same cut. So yeah, the stabbing method works, and the real Dr. Brewer ends up chopping plant dad in two with the axe. Yeesh. I remember experiencing this story as a kid, and the concept of an imposter parent was so scary to me. Especially this weird plant guy who, you really couldn't understand their motivations for doing what they did, even after the fact. Like, what was the plant dad's strategy exactly? Was he trying to turn the kids into plants? But then what? Well, he has a little plant family. Then he invites neighbors over for more nasty green soup until they have a little plant town. It's not made clear what plant dad wanted out of all this. It's even less clear in the show because at the end he tells Margaret to spray her real dad with weed killer, which would do nothing to him since he's not a plant.
Attack him. Now. Before it's too late. Destroy him.
So let's say Margaret did spray her real dad with weed killer. Wouldn't she just spray him right after she figured out nothing happened? It's the kind of thing that works better in the book when it's not weed killer, it's an axe. Also, in the book's last chapter, the rescued Dr. Merrick apparently gives Dr. Brewer his old job back. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone made an evil plant clone of themselves and that evil plant clone kidnapped me and threw me tied up into their basement closet, yeah, I don't think they'd be getting their job back. As for how the plant clone happened in the first place, I'll let Dr. Brewer explain.
Well, it was an accident. I cut my hand on a slide, and some of my blood mixed in with some plant molecules, and I ended up with something that was part plant and part human.
You never told me any of this.
Oh yeah, we need to talk about Mrs. Brewer, the worst character in the story. You never told me about any of this. God, read the room, Mrs. Brewer. Your family just went through something traumatic. You should be relieved, not excited.
You know, when Aunt Eleanor was getting better, she asked me about you two. I said you were both growing like weeds. I never realized how close to the truth I almost was.
Yeah, I'm glad this is all one big joke to you, Mrs. Brewer. Are we sure we don't have a plant mom on our hands? It's even worse in the book. For the plant versus human dad confrontation in the basement, she's there too. And her response to the debacle unfolding before her very eyes is to blame the kids. Kids, what have you done? But of course it doesn't stop her from cutting in with this golden line just a few pages later. We're okay. We're all okay. Yeah, no thanks to you.
Everything's going to be fine.
That acting, right? Look out, Daniel Day-Lewis. Anyway, we're actually not done with Stay Out of the Basement yet. Like most Goosebumps books, this one's got a twist.
Margaret. Margaret, help me. Please help me. I'm your father. I'm your real father.
Oh, I'm your father.
Ah, yes, the classic "Is it really over?" twist ending from Mr. Stein. Although to me, this one is clearly a joke. And now it's time for judgment. Let's microanalyze this children's horror book series made for third graders and see how it stacks up under superior adult scrutiny. So how many funny bones do you think this one's gonna get? Well, we'll start with Spine Shivers. I'm giving the book 3 out of 5. The psychological thriller aspect is the highlight of the book, but it doesn't really pay off until the confrontational basement scene. And until then, it's just the kids discovering some increasingly ridiculous clues. The plant food, the leaf hair, the dirt bed. Probably the scariest part pre-basement climax is when Plant Dad tries to feed them his mysterious plant soup, because it's really the only time that he tries to do anything sinister. I think the book could have been scarier if Plant Dad was a little less aloof and a little more insidious.
You're not a mad scientist, are you, Dad?
No, I'm an angry scientist.
As for the show, I'll give it a 3 out of 5 too. The actor for Dr. Brewer does a good job at portraying a man on the edge. Or should I say, a plant on the edge. The basement plants could have been a little creepier like in the books, but overall it did a decent job. For funny bones, I'll give both of them a 2 out of 5. It's worth it just for the scene of Plant Dad eagerly devouring plant food. And for closet skeletons, they both get a 3 out of 5. I'm considering the "Dad was a plant all along" climax as the twist ending, and even though it's heavily hinted at throughout the story, stuff like Dad devouring plant food and him serving the kids plant soup can be explained away by him being a mad scientist, not necessarily by him literally being a plant. The flower thing at the end is just a joke, but it's a charming one. I gave a little extra boost to the score for it. Overall grade here, the book and the show both get a solid B from me. They're not the best Goosebumps has to offer, but they're both decent showings. Again, I could change these as we make our way through the series. So, welcome to Dead House and Stay Out of the Basement. 2 solid entries in the Goosebumps series. But our string of good luck ends in the next video. I don't know, maybe it's not as bad as I remember. Let's get back to the subject at hand. When I was reading and watching these first 2 stories, they both strongly reminded me of something. Something dark. Something I hadn't thought about in a long time. Something I had buried back in the recesses of my mind. I'm talking, of course, about Troll 2. Troll 2 is a 1990 horror film that has become infamous as one of the funniest bad movies of all time.
If my father discovers you here, he cut off your little nuts and eat them.
You can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it. They're eating her. And then they're going to eat me. Oh my God!
It released only a couple years before the Dead House and Basement books, and a full 6 to 7 years before the TV episodes, but there's a startling number of similarities. Welcome to Dead House and Troll 2 have very similar sinister townsfolk.
You like Dark Falls? Great place to raise the kids. Kids with a sweet tooth like yours love ice cream.
It's especially apparent in the TV episode where they have the TV exclusive character Agnes Thurston. Check out her exaggerated mannerisms in this scene.
Ever since the chemical factory closed, he practically lives in that workshop of his.
Now check out the primary antagonist of Troll 2, the Goblin Queen.
I thought you might enjoy one of my ancient recipes. It's a traditional dish in these parts.
Oh, but you shouldn't have gone to so much trouble.
No trouble. Really?
I'm seeing double.
Good morning. I am your neighbor.
Oh, it's your friendly next door neighbor popping in with breakfast. Oh, thank you.
They even look similar. It's probably coincidence, but it really cracks me up to think that they took inspiration from an obscure B movie. But just look at this. In this scene, the protagonist's family is sitting down to a nice homemade meal. A plant soup meal from the looks of it. Yeah, that's right. The goblins in Troll 2 are vegetarians, so they want to turn these guys into plants by making them eat this stuff. Sound familiar?
Pick up your spoons and eat it.
There's a theme in both Dead House and Basement where the monsters disguise themselves as seemingly normal humans. a theme that's shared in Troll 2.
No! Don't eat this stuff! They're monsters! They're all monsters! If you eat this stuff, they'll kill us! They're goblins!
I'm mostly having fun with the comparisons at this point, though. I think when it comes to Stay Out of the Basement, seriously, if it's inspired by anything, it's inspired by The Fly. It's a very similar story about a scientist that accidentally mixes his DNA with a fly, just like Dr. Brewer mixed his with a plant. So no, I don't really think Stay Out of the Basement is inspired by Troll 2. It's just funny to think about. It's about as much of a stretch as saying it was inspired by the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes. Look, it's just like when Dr. Brewer tried to feed that plant stuff to his kids. R.L. Stine must have read this one and came up with the story. It's funny coming up with this stuff.
I've come here to say one magic word to you.
Yeah?
Cheeseburger.
Hamburgers for everybody. Let's go.
So, is the hit children's horror book series Goosebumps still scary as an adult? Well, no, but I'm actually surprised at how much I enjoyed rereading these books. It was pretty fun, actually. Hopefully, in the next video, assuming this one doesn't totally bomb, we'll have just as much fun checking out the next stories in the series. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go eat some pea soup and stay indoors. This is what these kinds of channels do, right? Like the nostalgic retro reviewer YouTube channels, they do little skits like this, right? This is fun. What do you think, Mr. Stein?
He's good. He's really good.
Explaining complex topics can be challenging. Highlight the text you want to simplify and let Grammarly rewrite it. Grammarly makes your message clear so it's understood. Download it for free at Grammarly.com.
What's it like to read Goosebumps as an adult? Is Monster Blood as weird as I remember? Does Say Cheese and Die hold up? And hey, what's with that new Disney Plus series? Answers to these questions and more coming up in this special report. Am I gonna have to come up with a unique intro for every single video? There's 62 of these books. Does this one suck? How about this one? Well, whatever, we got through it. Adult beware, you're possibly in for a scare. Last video, we revisited the first two stories in the original Goosebumps series, Welcome to Dead House and Stay Out of the Basement. And they got decent scores overall. And maybe you thought to yourself, are we gonna be eating this good for the rest of the series? Well, I'm afraid not. Our streak of good luck ends with the next book in the series, Monster Blood. I remember not liking Monster Blood much as a kid. I remember thinking it was silly and not scary at all. But I'm also open to the possibility that little 9-year-old John could have been wrong. But looking at the cover, we're not off to a great start. I don't know what the consensus Goosebumps community opinion is on Monster Blood's cover art, but for me, this cover isn't Jacobus' scariest work. We got some green goo dripping down some stairs, and there's some glasses in the middle. This might be scary to a housemaid or a janitor or something. Or maybe some scaredy cat little kid. But we're adults, remember? Some of us even have kids of our own. And if you have a kid, you've seen worse than this on a normal Tuesday. And then there's the color scheme. Orange and blue? I guess it's fine, but it can't save it. Just for fun, let's take a look at the 2008 classic Goosebumps reprint, which is much more cartoonish and dramatic. Not a fan of this one either. It's kind of worse than the original, to be honest. And now it's time to reveal the brand new renamed category for the cover, which I'm proud to say I came up with myself. I'm giving this one 1 out of 5 Necronomicons. Yeah, that's right, the Necronomicon is the new category name. It's the most notorious book cover in all of horror, after all. Alright, well, let's hope the insides of Monster Blood are better than its outsides. Yeesh. The story of Monster Blood is one that Mr. Stein thought was so good, it deserved not 1 sequel, not 2, but 3 sequels. And that's just in the main series. There's even more of them in the sequel series. Maybe after we're done reading all of them, you can tell me what the big deal was, because I'm not seeing it. Monster Blood kicks off with our main character, Evan, who's getting dropped off at his great Aunt Catherine's house while his parents go house hunting for their upcoming big move. Right away in the book, you'll note that this is told in third person, just like the previous book, Stay Out of the Basement, was. And it's unusual because the vast majority of Goosebump books are told in first person. Anyway, Evan is brought to Aunt Catherine's house by his mom, although in the TV episode it's both parents. I guess to highlight traditional family values or something. So you may be wondering what Aunt Catherine is like. Well, that depends. In the book, it describes Great Aunt Catherine as having black hair and looking younger than Evan expected. It even specifically says she is not a white-haired, elderly-looking lady. But in the show, she's a white-haired, elderly-looking lady. The actress who plays Aunt Catherine is actually still alive. Her name's Corinne Conley, and she's 94 years old. She's still performing, too. Look, she voiced some characters in Watch Dogs Legion just a couple years ago. Alright, sorry, back to Aunt Catherine. Another difference is that in the book, she's actually deaf, while in the show, well, she's clearly not. It's all come rushing back to me now. It wasn't the book that I disliked so much, it was the show. If you watched my last Goosebumps video, you may remember that I mentioned that the Welcome to Dead House and Stay Out of the Basement TV episodes were both two-parters. And even though they deviated slightly from the source material, they were still able to get most major details in the episode. Well, the Monster Blood TV adaptation is just one episode. And one episode it was.
Hello, Evan.
Like right from the jump, they make Aunt Catherine the complete opposite of what she's supposed to be in the book. She's kind of just an eccentric old lady in the show, but in the book, she is weird. She asks Evan repeatedly if he likes beef, and then she moves on to repeatedly ask him if he likes, quote, the girls. The Monster Blood book is pretty weird. The dialogue in this one is just so different from the previous two books. While the kids in Stay Out of the Basement and Welcome to Dead House were a little bratty with each other, they also took their parents pretty seriously and remained consummate professionals once the spooky stuff started. But our main man, Evan Ross? Nah. Evan hates Aunt Catherine.
I still think she's creepy.
Here's a charming moment where he shouts at her that she's a, quote, old coot, and then acts like it was fine to say because she's deaf and can't hear it. So yeah, Evan, kind of a little shit. One positive thing I will say about Evan though, he loves animals, especially his dog Trigger he brings with him to Aunt Catherine's house. In the book, Trigger is a Cocker Spaniel, but in the show, he's a Collie mix. Interestingly, you may remember that Petey from Welcome to Dead House was also a Collie mix. I wonder if they used the same dog for both roles.
Petey, for a dog, you're a great actor.
Aunt Catherine isn't a fan though, and insists Trigger be tied up in the backyard outside. Evan decides to take Trigger out on a walk when he meets neighborhood girl and love of his life, Andy. Andy's played by Sarah Podemski, who you may recognize as Rita from Reservation Dogs. Andy asks Evan who he is, and he says, "I'm me." I know he's 12, but this guy has absolutely no riz.
No, I'm just staying with my aunt for a while my parents look for a new house in Atlanta.
Oh.
Some more painful flirting ensues before Andy invites Evan to go into town with her. They go into some random thrift store called Wagner's Novelties and Sundries, where Evan finds a blue can with a mysterious substance inside called Monster Blood. Ooh. Wagner, the store owner, gets mad for some reason and insists it isn't for sale, but then immediately sells it to them for $2. I thought this was a weird interaction at first, but I've got a tinfoil hat theory about it now. I think the only reason Mr. Stein made Wagner get mad at first was so he could use it for a chapter cliffhanger. One thing I noticed while reading Monster Blood was that almost every chapter ends in a cliffhanger. At the end of the first chapter, Aunt Catherine meets them at the door wielding a bloody knife. It's revealed in the next chapter that she's just chopping up some beef. Second chapter, Evan opens the closet and something jumps out at him. As it turns out, it's Catherine's cat, Sarah Beth. Third chapter, jackass. Catherine tells Evan to, quote, bring the dog so she can take care of it. Turns out she meant for Evan to just take it outside. You get the idea. There's a cliffhanger at the end of every single chapter. Now, I didn't remember it being like that for the first two books I read, but I went back and checked, and they were like this too. I think the reason that it stuck out to me more with Monster Blood was that the chapters are way shorter. Welcome to Dead House only had 18 chapters, which is the least out of any Goosebumps book, fun fact. Stay Out of the Basement has a few more, but it's still only 21 chapters. Monster Blood, on the other hand, has 29. So that meant I was reading the cliffhangers in much quicker succession than before, and it meant that there were more of them overall. Hey, when you need cliffhangers, you need cliffhangers. So let's make Wagner get mad out of nowhere. Hey, what are you doing with that? Hey, that's not for sale. Oh, you want to buy it? That'll be $2, thanks. Evan and Andy go home and show the monster blood to Aunt Catherine, who seems nonplussed by it, which is very surprising considering how Evan and Andy find the monster blood in the show. In the TV episode, there's no Wagner, there's no store, there's no blue can. Instead, Evan goes into the bedroom across the hall from his and just finds it in a dusty cabinet. Aunt Catherine warns him not to go in there and acts like it's a really big deal.
Boy, this room is forbidden. Do you understand?
But of course, there's no locks or any other safety measures in place. At least the dad in Stay Out of the Basement had the sense to lock up his restricted area.
I put locks on the basement windows.
Evan and Andy start playing with the monster blood. It bounces, it stretches, it glows in the dark. They're really impressed by it. Well, in the show they are at least. The book version of Evan thinks it's actually not that great, even though whenever Andy asks if she can have it, he gets really protective. Sir, readings indicate no Riz in sight. Repeat, no Riz. Oh, there's this part in the book I thought was kind of interesting. Evan's on his way home to meet up with Andy when he runs into these teenage neighborhood bullies. And their names are Rick and Tony. Rick and Tony Bamer. Now, I'm really proud of myself for recognizing this, but this is actually a West Side Story Easter egg. One of the twins is named Tony, and Tony is also the name of the main character in West Side Story. The actor who portrays Tony in the 1961 film is named Richard Bamer, which you could also shorten to Rick. Now, why would Mr. Stein name the neighborhood bullies after Richard Bamer? I have no idea. I guess he just likes West Side Story. And to be fair, the original film is one of my favorites too. Don't believe me? Check out my Blu-ray box set. Yeah, that's right. I take West Side Story very seriously. It's like Mr. Stein named these bullies specifically for me and where my interests overlap. Richard Bamer is most well known for his role as Tony, but he also had some horror roles as well. For example, he also plays the nefarious hotel owner Ben Horn on Twin Peaks, which is something that blew my mind when I suddenly realized it about halfway through watching that series. Apart from Twin Peaks, Richard Bamer also starred in a classic for all the wrong reasons 80s horror film Silent Night, Deadly Night 3. Better watch out. Now, even if you don't think you're familiar with the Silent Night, Deadly Night series, you may be more familiar than you think. For example, perhaps you have seen this clip.
Garbage Day!
This clip is from Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. And no, that's not Richard Bamer. That's an actor named Eric Freeman, who went on to win an Oscar for his spectacular performance as the Santa Claus killer in this movie. Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 actually went on to sweep all the major categories that year. The Academy had never seen anything like it.
He didn't leave me.
To this day, I find it fascinating that Bamer was in a movie in this franchise. But hey, he's 85 now and still making things. In fact, most of the cast of West Side Story is still out there doing stuff. Look, here's George Chakiris and Rita Moreno from earlier this year. The people in this photo are both 91 years old. What are they drinking, unicorn blood? Speaking of blood, Evan and Andy check in on the monster blood and find out it's growing. Actually, that's most of the book. The monster blood continues to grow each chapter, to both Evan and Andy's amazement. It outgrows the blue can. It outgrows the bucket. It just keeps growing and growing. And to make matters worse, Trigger the dog actually eats some of it. And you can probably guess what the effects are. Now in the book, Trigger slowly grows over many chapters. In chapter 11, Trigger outgrows his collar, and Evan has to remove it to stop him from choking. Pretty traumatic experience there, by the way. One of my worst fears is walking in on my dog choking on something. Later, Evan notices that Trigger has doubled in size. They take him to the vet. Now normally, a Cocker Spaniel that has grown to twice its size in just a few days would set off some alarm bells. But this is an adult character in a Goosebumps book, so they're not alarmed at all. Trigger keeps growing until he's the size of a pony. Evan and Andy finally make the connection that the dog eating the monster blood is probably what's causing it to grow. Wait, that's getting bigger. And then this is getting bigger. Oh! Come on, Evan and Andy. or Evandy, as I'm going to start calling you because you're basically one little hive mind, all right? Get it together. You're not going to stop the monster blood like this. Pick up the pace.
You mean it's growing? That's exactly what I mean.
So yeah, in the book, it's a slow burn. But in the show, Evandy just walk outside one day and...
So you've got a 10-foot trigger running around the neighborhood. Should we go look for him? No.
We get it, they were on a tight budget. Back to the monster blood. Evandy notices that it isn't just growing, it's warm now.
It's warm.
And it's not bouncy anymore. It's sticky. Ooh. There's a lot of filler in the middle of the book documenting incremental changes in Trigger and in the monster blood. There's a couple scenes with the bully Bamer twins. Evan gets beat up at one point. There's even an entire chapter where Evan has not one, but 2 different dreams. What a waste of time. Actually, one of Evan's dreams is about him eating the monster blood and becoming a giant, which is what we in the biz call foreshadowing. Yep, Monster Blood 3. Mr. Stein remembered that Evan had this dream way back in book number 3 and wrote it into a whole nother book. What can I say? Sometimes dreams really do come true, or in this case, a nightmare. But don't worry, we've got like 26 more books in between this one and that one. Thank God. Evan pours the monster blood into an old bathtub sitting in storage at Aunt Catherine's house, and the monster blood tries to suck him into the tub and eat him. In the show, Andy's there to pull him out, but in the book, we have to read in excruciating detail his struggle to pull himself out of the tub. Interestingly, in the book version, Sarah Beth the cat appears to push him into the tub. The monster blood has grown out of control by this point, and Evandy are at a loss what to do about it. In the book, they try to take it back to Wagner's where they bought it, but uh-oh, it's closed. The store is out of business, and Evandy are out of ideas, so they decide to both go home. Evan tries to store the monster blood in an outdoor trash bin, but oops, they knock it over. One thing leads to another, and now the monster blood is chasing after them. Along the way, it eats a live Robin? Wow. It also eats the Bamer twins, who were stopping by to beat up Evan again, I guess. The book describes how Evandy could see the silhouettes of the Bamer twins inside the translucent monster blood, which is kind of a cool visual. Anyway, evil Flubber over here is on the rampage by the time Aunt Catherine sees it in the house. And now we get a big exposition dump.
Monster blood.
In the book, Aunt Catherine reveals she put a spell on the monster blood back when Evan first brought it to the house. The reason it's growing is because Catherine cursed it. Because she's a witch, you see. Furthermore, she was forced to do it by none other than Sarah Beth, her cat, who's actually another witch in disguise. Sarah Beth cursed Catherine with deafness and wanted her to live in her house alone. But when Evan came to visit, Sarah Beth wanted to use the cursed monster blood to drive him out. So then Sarah Beth transforms from a cat into her true witchy form.
That child is no cat.
And in classic early Goosebumps fashion, she orders the monster blood to kill the children. She even starts chanting, "Kill the children," over and over. You know, it's one thing to read Mr. Dawes from Welcome to Dead House tell the kids it doesn't hurt to die, or the stay out of the basement dad trying to feed his kids this horrible food to turn them into plants. But reading this adult woman chant, "Kill the children," repeatedly is probably the most evil thing I've seen someone do in these books so far. I love it. Sarah Beth is such a one-dimensional character. She's just totally evil. She keeps Aunt Catherine as her, quote, slave for like 2 decades. And then the first person other than Catherine she sees in those 20 years, she wants to kill. The Sarah Beth character just makes no sense to me. And just like the evil dad and Stay Out of the Basement, their motivations are never really explained. Now, I think it's good to leave some things up to the imagination, and I don't necessarily need everything spelled out for me, but in this case, I think she's just a really shallow character. Anyway, the horse-sized trigger bounds up and pushes Sarah Beth into the monster blood. The monster blood consumes her, losing all of its magical properties, and shrinks back to its normal size. You'll be relieved to hear that the Robin from earlier is just fine after all. Unfortunately, so are the Bamer twins. Trigger shrinks back to normal size. Evan's mother shows up just then to pick him up, and the book sort of just ends one page later, with Andy wanting to keep some of the monster blood as a souvenir. But what's this? It's gone. So yeah, the book Monster Blood is roughly 115 pages of just the green goo growing out of control, and then about 15 pages of sudden backstory, and then it just ends. It's worth noting too that in the last 15 pages there's 6 chapters, so a lot of that space is just blank half pages where either a chapter ends or there's a new chapter title, so it all happens very quickly. Now, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but before we get to them, we gotta talk about how the show handles this climactic scene, because it's just silly. In the show version, Evandy don't buy monster blood from the thrift store. Instead, they find it in the room across the hall in Aunt Catherine's house. And when Evandy release the monster blood from the glass jar they find it in, they also release Sarah Beth the cat. And she spends the entire episode skulking around the house, unbeknownst to Aunt Catherine. After the monster blood starts going on a rampage, Aunt Catherine is shocked to